I'm an old school design engineer. I don't like those newfangled randomized tests. I created the verification gap by refusing to insert assertions and function coverage in my design. I also created it by not considering the verification impact of my design decisions.
Hi, I'm Art Vandelay. I'm an architect, a design architect, and a design expert. And I have created a verification gap by not being willing to consider design for verification requirements while architecting my designs. And I have really created the verification gap by being very eager to add more and more and more features late and late and late in the project cycle, without really having a very compelling reason for doing so.
My name is Donald. I'm a verification manager, and I created the verification gap by driving hard for short-term milestones, so much so that my engineers were forced to take shortcuts that caused downstream delays that delayed our takeoff. I've also caused the verification gap by not considering the capabilities of individual engineers up front in the planning process.
Howdy. My name is Greg Su, and as an executive in a design house, I have created a verification gap by spreading my teams globally across the world and making it very difficult for them to collaborate effectively with each other. I have also created the verification gap by making it prohibitively impossible for the people on my team, my engineers, my managers, to work effectively with EDA vendors who are also very eager to solve the problems that we have. And I very often create the verification gap by keeping our schedules so tight, where I don't give my engineers and managers time to reinvent themselves, to adopt new tools and improve their skills and train themselves. So I have created the verification gap.
My name is Ted. I'm a old school verification engineer. I just have no time for that system Verilog and UVM stuff. I created the verification gap by refusing to learn and fully utilize these new technologies of today.
Hi, my name is Art Walnut, and as an EDA vendor, I created the verification gap by not educating my customers adequately. I love to sell them tools, but I have not really trained them on using them well. And I have really created the verification gap by procrastinating my participation in the standards process, both in the specification and the definition of the standards, as well as really supporting them in our tools and methods. You know, at the end of the day, I have to do what's good for business and not necessarily bridge the verification gap.
All right, so my real name is Tom Simons, and I'm a verification engineer. And I've created the verification gap by designing flows that were probably overly complex for the problem they were trying to solve. No gloating, guys. I've also created the verification gap by not putting adequate comments in my code, or not doing adequate upfront planning before I jump into code. I got a list of a few other items I've done here. Well, yeah, you get the picture.
And my name is Ram Narayan, and I have been very good at creating the verification gap very early in my career, when I was too opinionated and did not really take the time to understand concepts well enough, and went about my way creating methods which were just plain something I would not take responsibility for anymore. And I still create the verification gap by not spending too much time in understanding all the tools and methods I have available to me, and going off and trying to invent things for myself, and often spending a lot of time in refining them and refining them and refining them beyond any returnable returns. What we have seen so far is just a very small sample of the many ways in which I have created the verification gap. The seed for this presentation and this work was sown back in 2014 when J.L. Gray out here had hosted a panel at DDCon. And the topic for that was, did we create the verification gap? And that was a very insightful discussion, and that's where we got the idea that it's something that's worth pursuing. So Tom and I went about trying to understand the gap further. Is there a verification gap? What is a verification gap? How is it measured? And you will see a number of publications that talk about different ways in which the verification gap manifests. 60+% of projects are missing schedule, and that is often attributed to verification. We have 2/3 of projects not enjoying first silicon success, and that is almost always attributed to verification. We see the number of verification engineers growing at a much faster pace than design engineers. Clearly, verification is inadequate. So there's plenty of signs that say that, well, there is a verification gap, and there's not just a gap, but actually the gap is widening. So Tom and I were keen on investigating, okay, where is this gap coming from? What is causing the gap? What are we doing to increase the gap? And so what we did was we went and sought out some industry experts. We talked to designers, verification engineers, managers, executives, EDA vendors, consultants, contractors, and asked them the same set of 3 questions. Is there a gap? Is it widening? What causes the verification gap? What do you see as the reasons for the gap to be there? And a specific question, what have you done to cause the verification gap? The responses we got from everyone was really very different from what we thought, what we expected going in. It was a fantastic experience for us to meet a lot of people and gather the information. What we did with the information was we categorized what we learned. We categorized the gap, the factors for the gap, in 2 ways. One's based on what the contributors are, and the other one based on how much control we ourselves have over these gap factors. We call that the tractability. So what we found was there are some aspects of the gap which are just inherent in nature. These are things like design complexity. Yes, design complexity is increasing, but it is what it is. And we just have to do the best with what we have. And this is inherent. This is an inherent portion. We have no control over this, largely. Then it has the component of the gap, which is completely transient in nature. This is to do with things where we go through a period of time in improving our methods, learning new tools, learning new methodologies, and that takes us a while for us to become good at using them. So this is a transient component of the gap. This takes time, this takes effort for us to become better at things, and the gap goes away. The most interesting part of the gap is what we call the self-induced gap. This is the gap that this is what we bring upon ourselves with the choices we make, with our attitude and our behavior towards our work. And this is a very interesting aspect of the gap, which very often magnifies how important the inherent and the transient components of the gap really are. What we'd like to do is Tom will spend some time in going over some of the details of what we learned and what we heard from different people, and talk about the different gap contributors and their tractability.
Okay. Get this guy going. All right. Excuse me. So what we did here was we took all the responses from all the people we surveyed, and we organized them into these 7 contributors to the verification gap. So let's take a look at what our survey respondents felt were the causes of the verification gap. First up is the complexity gap. Clearly, complexity of our designs is increasing when you consider all the additional design IP that's going into our designs, all the cores that are going in, all the complex configurations. The sheer size of our chips are increasing. And often, and what this says is as the design complexity is increasing, therefore the verification complexity must be increasing even more so. And this is often given as the primary or the only source of the verification gap. But what we did is we asked our survey respondents, do you think an individual engineer today can actually implement more complex logic than they could, say, 10 years ago? And most of them answered saying, no, not really. So given this and given all the other results we got, we concluded that the complexity gap is only a small portion of the full cause of the verification gap. All right, the skills gap. This was given as one of the key causes of the verification gap. And it's easy to understand why. With all the new tools, the new languages, the new methodologies, and these things continually changing, it's really hard just to keep up, let alone keep up at the highest skill level. And this is true for designers as well as verification engineers. We had a lot of respondents say that their designers lacked adequate skills for assertions and functional coverage, as well as lacking enough skill or maybe more attitude to properly consider their design decisions as to their impact on verification. But probably one of the key areas in the skills gap that most of our respondents listed was a lack of software skills in their verification team, particularly a lack of advanced software skills. Most verification engineers today have double E degrees. Very few of them have only a small amount, if any, training in advanced software skills. Yet, with today's verification environments, advanced software skills are a fairly critical component. So much so that a lot of our respondents said that this difference in skill led to a significant productivity delta between two engineers of otherwise similar experience. And we've seen software papers rating this productivity gap of up to 10 times, which is an enormous number. Yet only one of the people we surveyed spoke of any effort by their company to try and understand this gap and try to do something to bridge it. This really gets into what a number of people cited, and that was a lack of any kind of formal, advanced skills development training by the company. Usually the engineers were just thrown into the mix, and advancing their own skills development was left up to them. Some did that well, but some really didn't, and it would have helped if their company had provided some mechanism to improve that. All right. Let's see, a related topic on this that was raised by a number of our respondents was innovation management. So a company's trying to roll out some new tools, some new methodology, but it turns out that it just doesn't meet its expected promise. So typically the tool itself, or maybe even the engineers, were blamed for this failure, but most of our respondents felt that it was the process of rolling out this complex tool. It was not well thought out. It was really the cause of its failure to really perform. Now, interestingly enough, none of our respondents cited a lack of management skills as a source for the verification gap. But quickly, with a lot of these items up here, they're really failures on the part of management to identify and address these issues. So we feel that lack of management skills is in fact a key component of the verification gap. Okay, the schedule gap. Now an interesting question here. Could it be that our aggressive schedules with their aggressive milestones, are they themselves in some way partly responsible for the verification gap. A lot of the people we spoke to felt that they were. And it makes sense. With enough pressure, someone's going to take a shortcut that allow them to meet their milestone, the letter of the milestone today, but it'll cause them some kind of delay downstream. Later in this project, maybe later in the next project. And one very commonly cited example of this was failure to adequately comment the code. I bet everyone in this room has spent a lot of time trying to debug some problem where maybe just a few lines of comments would have really helped get that done right. Okay, what else? Quality gap. A lot of people, almost everybody, spoke of some kind of architectural thrash, some kind of changing definition or inadequate definition of the architecture that caused a lot of verification delays. And this includes, lack of a microarchitecture spec or an inadequate spec, lack of interface specs, lack of a good definition of the hardware-software interface, which is very commonly listed problem. Now, of course, a lot of people, there were varying opinions on this. A lot of people said some amount of architectural thrash, of course, was necessary, and so much so that you didn't want to spend too much time up front getting it perfect, because you'd just be wasting your time. You're going to have to let it evolve to some degree. But there was one engineer in particular who was working on a very large, very complex chip. And he said the heavy architectural, the ongoing architectural thrash on their project was accountable for 50% of their verification cycles. Now, quality gap spread the gambit. We also had more mundane issues like environment quality that was cited by a number of people. Simple things like your simulation environment, the edit, compile, run loop time, regression management, triage management. We spoke to some contractors who deal with a lot of different vendors, and they see customers, and they see customers that do a good job with their build environments, those that do a bad job. And they said they would see up to a 20% productivity hit by those environments that are not done well, do not follow best known methods. Yet often, this issue was cited as a relatively low priority for management to deal with, so it just was left unaddressed. All right, metrics gap. This was a case where some people felt that metrics were being collected for metrics' sake. And in particular, maybe assertions were being done pretty well, but a lot of people felt coverage was forcing them to spend a lot of time for a relatively low value. Some people suggested that it really might be better if we allowed engineers to follow their intuition and hunt down bugs where they expect them to be found, as opposed to spending so much time on low-level coverage just to fill out a metric slide for management. We also looked at this a little bit as we should look at assertions and coverage as a difficult skill to master and not simply a metric to fill out a slide. All right, reuse gap. We spoke briefly about this up front. Design IP, third-party IP use is growing significantly, but often this IP can be pretty easy for the designer to insert, but very difficult for a verification team or a software team to utilize. And in particular, we had a number of people say they just hadn't found a good way to leverage this information that was developed by one team, what they learned about this IP, say a verification unit level team, and reuse that information such that the next team, say a post-silicon team, didn't have to completely relearn it. One architect at a large company here in town felt that their failure to come to grips with this was preventing them from actually containing the verification gap at their company. Another related reuse issue, a little pet peeve of mine, is where you have managers tend to think that reuse is always a good thing. You know, reuse of smaller verification or even design components or even scripts is always a good thing. Yet reuse has a cost. Either the cost to make it reusable or the cost for somebody to work through it and figure out how to use it. Sometimes it just makes sense not to reuse it. And we have to carefully consider those costs. All right. Our final gap we call the integrity gap. And the integrity gap is the difference between our stated goals and our actions. Sometimes we unintentionally or even intentionally do something different than our stated goals. One type of this is what we call fear-driven verification. This is really the attitude where you must do some task. If you cannot prove, it won't find a bug. But this kind of attitude leads us to spend a lot of time doing very low-value tasks. And often this is driven by some exterior manager from outside the verification team that has some particular pet peeve, and we must deal with this particular item no matter how much it takes. And I think this is a very significant cause of the verification gap. And this is a case where the people we spoke with were a little frustrated that they were required to spend a lot of this time when they would have preferred to be able to make these judgments on their own. At Oracle, we found one thing that's worked out well for us in this particular scenario is we say, but would you hold up tape out for a few days for this one little thing? And if the answer is no, and sometimes it was, then we can just drop that one. Another area is miscommunication. We had an example of this on our project where the project director was insisting that we do some tasks that everybody felt was of really low value. But it turned out it was simply a miscommunication. He doesn't understand all the factors involved. It took us quite a lot of time and emotion to be expended before we realized it was wrong. Or what about complexity for complexity's sake, sometimes called gratuitous complexity, where a decision is made that is better for our resume than it is for the project. Sometimes we do have engineers have ulterior motives, and they make decisions, maybe sometimes even subconsciously, but this just causes an increase in verification gap. All right, lastly, we saw what we called lack of introspection. We did speak with a few people that didn't have a lot to say about how they caused the verification gap or what they could do to reduce the verification gap. Now, this may have been more a reflection of the aggressive milestones that they were driving to, but regardless of the cause, without introspection, we certainly cannot close the verification gap. All right, so what does this all mean? Here's a nice little graph that gives us a little summary of all the results we got from our survey respondents. The bottom here shows the 7 contributors to the verification gap and showing each of the types of causes, the red being the self-induced causes of the verification gap, yellow the transient, the green the inherent causes of the verification gap. Now this is just a qualitative assessment of all the conversations we had, but it gives us a place to start with. And based on that, this is how we concluded that really only 25% or so of the verification gap is caused by inherent causes, things that we have little control over. But the remaining 75% is controllable. So this is really both good news and bad news. The good news is 75% of the verification gap is controllable, and with a little bit of effort, we can reduce it. The bad news is the red here, about 50% of the verification gap, shows that we did indeed cause the verification gap ourselves.
Thanks, John. So what we have seen is a number of different ways in which I have created the verification gap. Let's see what is it that we can do to bridge the verification gap. The inherent verification gap can be bridged by innovation. Innovation of new tools, new methods, new techniques, new processes to just break down the barriers that are preventing us from making that progress right now. The transient verification gap requires investment. Investment in training, investment in adopting methods, investment in collaboration, and facilitating an environment where we can work effectively to reduce the impact or the longevity of the transient gap. And the fun part is the self-induced gap, and that requires introspection. It requires us to take responsibility for the way we conduct ourselves, for the choices we make, for our attitude and our behavior, so we can actually be more productive in resolving the inherent and the transient aspects of it. It requires us to take an open mindset and say, you know what, I have caused a verification gap and only I can do something about it. Very often we find people trying to apply innovative solutions to address a self-induced gap. You cannot apply a technical solution to a behavioral problem. And by doing so, you might just be addressing the symptom of the problem, but never really addressing the root cause of the problem. We had an EDA vendor that we were talking to, and their company sold very high-priced solutions to their customers. And they said, well, the real problem that we're trying to address is caused by miscommunication between two groups at the customer. So, okay, what if the customer became smart and decided to address the communication problem that they had? Would your tool still be useful? The answer was not very compelling. And we find this time and time again that we find people going and spending a lot of money throwing at tools and people to try to solve problems when the root cause is really behavioral. So, to conclude, we definitely saw that the perception of the verification gap has almost always been related to design and complexity. And we found that that was not the case. Much of the gap was transient in nature and most of it was really self-induced. We might have followed the mantra that verification is for the paranoid for probably too long in this industry. Verification is definitely not for the paranoid. But verification is for those who are meticulous. The paranoid only cause the verification gap. We are at a very exciting time in our industry. We have a plethora of tools and new methods and new methodologies, and it's very exciting to be in this industry at this time. We have a lot of choices. In fact, to a large extent, it becomes hard to be very good at what we're doing, both as design engineers, verification engineers, and managers. Plenty of choices to make, plenty of exciting choices, options to choose from. And we find it's very important that we make the choices which are really aligned with our goals for our projects, be it schedule goals or quality goals or budget goals, constraints. Take responsibility for the choices we make and the consequence of the choices we make. So we are in a better position to actually accept that, you know what, I created the gap and I can do something about it. Our recommended next step for each one here is to turn your attention inwards. Is for you to understand what is your gap, what are your gap factors, what is it that you are doing to cause your verification gap. We see plenty of presentations from vendors and people selling solutions as to, oh, these are the gap factors and this is what is causing the verification gap, but that may not be true for you. You've got to understand your situation for yourself so you can do something about it. And the only way to address your self-induced gap is in the present moment. So when you find yourself taking an action or behaving in a way that's causing a gap, so you can bring your awareness towards it and say, you know what, I can adapt, I can shift, and make sure that I do something that does not make my gap wider. We thank you all for listening to us. We thank Kelly and DB Club for giving us the opportunity to talk to you today. We are also appreciative of our management at Oracle Labs, who have been very liberal and gracious in giving us the time to work on this. And as Tom and I have created the verification gap, and we're very good at it. We are also looking for people who are very good at bridging the gap. Thank you.